שלום, שומעים אותי? Do you hear? Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Oh, שומעים אותי? Okay.
Yes, is it Rashi or?
No, it's Edward, just a sec. I'm trying to also have my video on. Yes, all right. Yes.
All right.
Yes, Rashi? Edward, just a sec. I'm trying to also have my video on. Yes, all right. Yes.
All right.
Okay. Oh, all right. שלום, Okay, it seems that the problem has been solved. I don't hear myself anymore. Hello? כן, דיברתי באנגלית כי פה. Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope the technical glitches are over and that we have a recording. Will be replacing the lead today, and I hope there won't be too many problems.
All right. Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
Hello, Geshe.
Hello. Hi. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sorry for the delay. Okay. All right. Are we ready to start?
We are.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Let's do it. Great. Okay. So as usual, let's start with some breathing meditation. And then to make this time most beneficial, visualize in the space in front of you Buddha Shakyamuni, which is not just make believe, since the Buddha's mind is anywhere and everywhere. So I think that the Buddha is inseparable from your own Lama or your Lamas. Embodying all the enlightened qualities we can attain ourselves. I think that is wearing the saffron robes of a fully ordained simple monk. His radiant body being a manifestation of his enlightened mental qualities. And then also visualize that you're surrounded by each and every sentient being. Placing their hopes in your spiritual development. Those sentient beings you usually try to avoid. You resent, or who resent you right in front of you. And then remembering that all other sentient beings are just like ourselves in so many ways. For instance, the fact that they all have the right to be happy, just as we have that right. They all have the right to be free from suffering. And also remember the fact that our well-being is dependent on other sentient beings. Our mental as well as our physical well-being. And then based on that, generate what's called affectionate love, this feeling of closeness, this feeling of care for all sentient beings. Which then gives way to an affectionate mind that not only wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering, but wants to take personal responsibility to lead sentient beings towards a state of liberation. And then let that aspiration grow stronger. To give rise to the special altruistic attitude that is determined to use all our time and energy from now on to work towards helping sentient beings to overcome all their unwanted experiences together with their causes. And since we can do so realistically only once we become enlightened, become just like the Buddha, let's generate the aspiration for the benefit of all sentient beings surrounding us to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And that way to reach our highest potential. And let's think that this is also the motivating force with which we continue to study the fundamental wisdom. So let's first do the prayer, recite the prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits or practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits or practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits or practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so I'll start to share the screen. Oh, it still says host disabled participant screen sharing.
You now are.
Ah, yes. Yes, great. Okay, I've got it. Let's start with the Lamrim outlines. Here it is. Okay, great. Now these outlines, well, it talks about the way of leaving the body and death and taking rebirth, which is really quite nice because the topic of death is so important. And as part of the teachings that are common, that's part of the practices common to a person of middling spiritual capacity or middling spiritual aspiration, death is mentioned again in the context of fast. The Lamrim spoke about how we're reborn in samsara. So afflictions, of course, there's a long discussion we had on the different afflictive emotions and then how they lead to the accumulation of karma. We explained that, we talked about that. So this is how we're born in samsara, how we cycle within samsara, or basically born with these five aggregates, which are in many texts are described as the five aggregates themselves, so having this mind and this body. But what happens when those causes are exhausted? Well, death occurs. And so to remind us of death again, of course. That is particularly important based on the fact that we have this precious human rebirth. We don't just have a human rebirth, but a precious human rebirth, which is said to be so rare. And if we look around, I mean, how few people are there who have the same circumstances we have? Not least the fact that we're interested in the Dharma, that we're interested in practicing it, we're making an effort, however difficult it may be, we're giving some time to the Dharma. So that being so rare, that is a hugely precious opportunity that we don't know we'll get again. And of course, all the opportunities, all the freedoms we have physically, mentally, and so forth. Anyway, we don't know how long we're going to have those, which is why it's so important to reflect on death. Again, in the context, of course, of the Four Noble Truths of meditating on suffering. So here it doesn't mention that many outlines. There are more outlines depending on the text, on the Lamrim text, but the way death occurs. So what are the causes for death. So to remember, of course, we spoke about karma previously a little bit. So there's the karma that has thrown us into this existence, and it comes with a certain time, which means all of us are born into this human existence, and whichever karma or however, well, the karma, the human karma has different lifespans. So it's not like you're born as a human. All humans have a lifespan of 80, 90 or 100 years or what have you. Every life has a different lifespan because of the projecting karma that's responsible for this human life. So we need to remember that. We don't know how long this lifespan is. It could be exhausted tonight. So again and again to remember, it may not be as long as we expect it to be just because our neighbor just celebrated his 90th birthday. Well, there's no guarantee we'll be around that long. But there's one condition, it's just that the lifespan has exhausted, that the projecting karma, the lifespan that it came with, that this is exhausted. But there are two other conditions that are usually described. We don't know. We don't know, but we may not have enough merit, enough positive potential to keep alive, to stay alive. So because of the positive potential we're lacking, so therefore we may lack the necessities to support our life, which means we may not have the necessity to get food and clothing and shelter, or just the kind of medicine, the different kinds of medicine we need. In case we get sick, that may not be available. So anyway, we may lack the merit to stay around for long enough. And then lastly, another condition that is described, we may experience premature death. So in the case of our merit running out or not having enough merit to stay alive in the form of lacking the necessities of life, well, another premature death would be if we put ourselves in dangerous situations. So if we create obstacles, if there are obstacles to our life, which we also contribute to. So that's often how it's explained, that we're unable to avoid certain circumstances. And in the sutras, there are different examples that are mentioned. So for instance, in terms of the food we eat, that we don't avoid food that is potentially harmful for us, which is interesting at this day and age. I mean, so much food around that's really unhealthy, whereas in the past, people had to avoid kind of poisonous fruits and mushrooms and so forth. Nowadays, it's avoiding, I don't know, fast food. I mean, extensive amount or exaggerated amounts of fast food and what have you. So sugar, too salty, too sugary, I mean, too sweet and so forth. Anyway, so that's one example given in the sutras, that we don't eat the right kind of food, or not using medicine in the right way, using it inappropriately. And again, nowadays, a lot of examples of that, of not taking medication in the right way, mixing it with certain medicines, I mean, certain substances and so forth. I mean, so many examples when we're not careful about the medication we take. There are also other examples that we engage in activities we are not qualified to engage in. So to decide I'm going to climb Mount Everest without being trained in the right way, without lacking the skills to do so, or I don't know, any kind of risky behavior in terms of I don't know, taking a trip into a desert and not being well equipped and so forth. And of course, sexual misconduct, which can lead to sexually transmitted diseases and so forth. So these are all examples given for us to die prematurely. And it's important to remember. So of course, we can't do anything about the first condition. If our life is gone, our life is gone. I mean, if the lifespan is over, there's nothing we can do. And of course, to remember that lifespan can cover 90 years, it can cover 10 years, 20 years. We just don't know. But about the other two conditions, we can do something about that. First of all, to accumulate enough merit, so to continue to watch our mind, reflect on our negativities, reduce those, accumulate or generate positive states of minds, avoid afflictions, and in that way accumulate more merit, more positive potential. So that will definitely help us to stay alive longer. I mean, make the most out of this life. And then, of course, when the time has come, to also be ready for our own death. So that is, as you all know, extremely important. And to remember today or tomorrow, it may be our last day. So to live every day in that way, at least to remember death, to make it a point, integrate it into your practice, maybe recite a Lamrim prayer that mentions death and impermanence in whichever way you want, but to be aware of these three conditions as just mentioned. And then, of course, to prepare for what's going to come. So to be well prepared. I mean, as you've all heard, a virtuous mind is so crucial at the time of death, simply because, well, on the coarser level, the mind, of course, becoming subtler and subtler as you die. But although the mind grows subtler and subtler as part of the, well, depending on how fast death is, but let's say it's not like an instant death, which still means our consciousness will grow subtler, but getting sick and so forth. So in that case, it's much more obvious that our mind grows subtler. But unless the very subtle mind of death has arisen, which is described to be neutral, especially in the case of ordinary beings, it's neutral. Well, before that, any type of mind that is virtuous, or it can be virtuous, any kind of mind that proceeds, even though it's subtler than our ordinary mind, any mind that precedes the subtlest mind of death can be virtuous. It can also be non-virtuous. But so if it is virtuous, it's very likely that a positive type of projecting karma will ripen to project us into a positive kind of rebirth. Whereas if there's a negative state of mind that arises, anger and hatred and what have you, all the way up to the moment preceding the subtlest moment of death. So if that's non-virtuous, then it's very likely that a negative karma ripens and we're projected in a negative existence that lacks all the freedoms, all the opportunities we have right now. So this is extremely serious. We need to take it seriously. And so that being the case, therefore, to work towards it every day counts, every minute counts, every situation counts as a preparation for our own death. That at the very least, we don't have any regret. We don't die with a mind full of regret for everything we've done, but also that we've created the habit, we've habituated ourselves, we've familiarized ourselves with virtuous states of mind. And as we all know, I think we all know from experience that when we sleep, for instance, so the way we act during our awakened, like during the time when we're awake, can be very different to our sleep. So our sleep is not necessarily virtuous. It depends very much on our last thoughts before we fall asleep. And what we'll also notice is that there's very little control. I mean, I've definitely had moments I woke up in the morning and I thought, oh gosh, how could I do this in my dream? I talked to this person in this way, being angry, being aggressive. I talked to someone in this particular dream. I would never talk to someone like that in this while I'm awake. So that showed me how there's very little control once we fall asleep. And it's important to deepen our habits that Of course, at the time of our dreams, we don't accumulate negativity by having these negative, possibly aggressive dreams, etc. But even more important, since our sleep and our death are very similar, that we have certain control over our mind when we die. So it may be easy to think, oh, I'm just going to keep my mind virtuous. I can do that right now. Well, we can do it when everything is going well, where our mind is coarse. There's a gross mind, the mind that is usually active when we're awake. Things are going well. Yes, so there's a certain level of control. But when we die, this is something, well, I have a lot of experience, I probably don't remember. And to be aware that this moment can lead to a lot of fear, can lead to a lot of confusion, and of course, to the afflictive emotions that we're more familiar with. And therefore, it's again so extremely important, just in preparation for our own death, to watch our own emotions, our negative our afflictions, to be more aware of them, and of course to work even harder towards replacing them with positive emotions. So this is one part of this reflection here that I wanted to emphasize a lot, to bring death into our life more as a preparation for a meaningful death. Okay, so having said that, that should do for meditation on the Lamrim, to, of course, bring the Lamrim into your daily life. That's so important, and connected with everything else you do when it comes to the Dharma. So in terms of what we're studying right now, well, we're going to die because our life right now is controlled by ignorance, by the misperception of reality, and whatever caused our existence, well, of course, what caused it was our root misperception, other afflictions, and karma. Well, whatever caused this present existence is also responsible for our own death. And it's up to us to prepare for it in an appropriate way, to have a certain degree of control where we're going. All right. And of course, studying about emptiness, etc., definitely helps to reduce the afflictions, etc., which leads me towards the second or the next part of today's class, which is Jimmy's question. So Jimmy sent me a question. It turns out I somehow came up with Jimmy's name. His name is not actually Jimmy, but Joseph. But he said I could continue to call him Jimmy. So sorry for that. I don't even know why I thought your name was Jimmy. But anyway, yes, I can continue calling him Jimmy. So Jimmy's question is, are we using the example of a sprout because it's the simplest? Yeah, I think definitely. It's a simple example. It's something we can observe. Most people are familiar with that. In the past, I mean, when there were a lot more farmers, of course, people were even more familiar with this example. But I think even nowadays, it's a good example. It's easy to describe. And yeah, I think that's the reason. It is a very neutral object. He's right. It's a very neutral example, and doesn't bring up very strong emotions in me, and in me either. I mean, not just in Jimmy, but I think in most of us, unless someone is extremely attached to their seeds and sprouts. But he says, when I have to do the chores and cleaning up after the other people, we have 10 people sharing a house, I feel strong indignity and often become agitated in my mind. Also, I've been experiencing some medical health problems for many years now. They're getting heavier. How does this reasoning help with that? My question is, how can we best apply this, the non-arising and non-production of the sprout, etc., to the I, the self, our body and mind, which are so dear to us? In what ways our mind also not arising, not produced ultimately ourself? In what ways our self also not arising, etc.? And how do we reconcile this with the fact that our self conventionally does exist? Okay, now that's a really important question. And I'm happy that this question is asked because, well, it shows that Jimmy's making an effort to bring whatever we learn, and it's really abstract right now, and difficult to follow and so detailed. I mean, he really makes an effort nonetheless to bring it into his own life. And that is what the study is all about, to reflect on how to think about how can we actually make this relevant to us. And this is what we all need to do, because you know your own life, you know your own challenges, your own situation. No one can do it for you, but this is one of the most important parts of, or most important aspects of studying the Dharma. Except it's so difficult right now because it's about sprouts and seeds, and yeah, we are still struggling through the very beginning. Now, what I really like about this question is that, well, first of all, there's definitely a certain degree of self-reflection, because when we do certain things, oftentimes we just feel unhappy, and we're not really sure what it is that disturbs us. So here, feeling of indignity, a feeling of being humiliated, possibly, or like it's a demeaning kind of chore. And so I'm still talking about cleaning up. And I thought about this afternoon. I was thinking, well, great. I mean, the cause has been identified. There's a feeling of indignity, for instance, using that as the example. But actually, there are different ways of looking at this. I mean, from the point of view, like worldly kind of ideas, cleaning after other people, I was thinking, well, if hypothetically, if in order to clean after other people, you needed to get a PhD from Harvard, I don't think it would feel that humiliating or demeaning to clean after other people. Of course, it would have a totally different standing. So in general, of course, in ordinary, in worldly society, because for just as a job of a cleaner, it doesn't have much of a status or whatever. I mean, I'm just putting it out here because I don't think that's what Jimmy means, but I think it kind of comes in there as well. So that's just from a worldly point of view. And of course, it's disgusting, other people's dirts, and, you know, possibly other people using us if we have to clean. I mean, we clean after them, and then they make even more dirt because they, you know someone is taking care of things. So all that, taking that into consideration from a worldly point of view, it totally makes sense. And I say that because I feel exactly the same way. I can totally identify with that. But then there's, of course, also the Dharma. And I'm not even talking about emptiness here. But actually, when we talk about bodhicitta, when we talk about compassion, it's much easier to say it than to actually practice it. I know from my own experience, but just to throw it out there, well, then it's actually an incredible opportunity to benefit others. I mean, because it isn't a fancy kind of job. I mean, like a doctor may also have to, I don't know, clean a wound of like old flesh and clean disgusting things, but still it's a doctor. So there's a certain, there's money involved, there's a certain image involved. But cleaning after other people, that's like a lowly kind of job. But from a dharmic point of view, it's such an expression in humility, especially doing it without wanting something, even wanting to be appreciated. I mean, just doing it for the sake of it. Of course, if we have to do other things, if we want to do a retreat, of course, we won't be able to always do it, but to use it from the point of view of, well, benefiting sentient beings. I mean, in the texts, we find explanations of bodhicitta, of love and compassion, being so moved by love and compassion, or so motivated by them, that we would go into the hell realm for a single sentient being. So if we have that kind of love, then cleaning for someone may be another way to practice that love and care for other sentient beings, like they're our own children, like we're looking after our own children, just from that point of view of love and compassion. And, I live in a nunnery, And this is also an issue, doing chores around the house and bringing away the garbage, or cleaning, I don't know, the hallways and so forth. And the nuns, who I believe to be, according to my understanding, those who really sincerely dedicated towards the benefit of others, they do the most work. I mean, there's some nuns, whenever there's something that needs to be done, they don't make a big deal out of it. They do it right away. So I don't know, the cook is gone and she's on vacation, they cook, but they don't get any appreciation. I mean, oftentimes the other nuns don't know about it. So they do anything. What is necessary for, how can I help the community? And it's really inspiring to see that. So from a worldly point of view, there's one way of looking at it, and I totally get that. But then there's also the Dharma. So that's just from the point of view of love and compassion. And so a way to serve others. And there are many great practitioners who sometimes took on the job of just a cleaning person, of cleaning the potty of this person, and just doing kind of demeaning jobs in order to work with their own mind and strengthen their compassion. So that's one aspect. But what is, of course, extremely important is to bring in what we study. What we study here about emptiness, about, well, the self. Yes, the self is really important. We haven't discussed it that much. We've been more about sprouts and seeds. But what is the I that feels debased? What is the I that feels humiliated? To look for it. And if we have a sense there's a humiliated I and an I that feels, doesn't feel dignified, I mean, that feels agitated and so forth, what are the causes that give rise to it? Well, the fact that I clean after other people. But is that an inherent cause? Does it inherently give rise to it? No, it's merely labeled. It's merely labeled that this cause gives rise to this I. And anyway, I mean, this agitation or that cause of the agitation, cleaning, it's not inherent in that it will agitate my mind, because I can turn it into my practice of bodhicitta. I can turn it into the practice of compassion and love for other sentient beings. In particular, Lama Zopa Rinpoche oftentimes says, or in many of his teachings or books and so forth, he talks about doing a job such as cleaning and visualizing you purify the mind of all sentient beings. So not only generating love and compassion for sentient beings before you do it, but also to put it into the practice of purification, like turn it into a purification practice. So I think I'm purifying my own mind, I'm purifying the mind of all sentient beings. The more I scrub, the more suffering I remove, and sentient beings will experience less problems and so forth. So actually, that same action of cleaning, since it doesn't inherently have the capacity to lead to agitation and a feeling of being humiliated and so forth, since it doesn't have that, we can turn it around through another aspect. We transform it into Dharma practice. That's only possible because there's no inherent arising, there's no inherent cause, and of course there's no inherent self that is agitated. There's no inherent agitation, etc. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but of course we need to discuss more about emptiness to get a fuller sense. So not just is there there's no inherent cause, there's no inherent arising, there's no inherent result, and then the self, etc. That's part, of course, of our study, to go into more details of the lack of inherent existence of the different phenomena. About the health issue, that is definitely very difficult. It's harder to turn that into Dharma practice, definitely more difficult than to clean after other people. But of course, still, it reminds us, of course, of samsara. This is the nature of samsara. This is the, we're moving towards our own death. So again, to remind us of our own death, but also to think that the pain, for instance, we experience, the weakness and so forth, these are merely labeled. Our body, this being my body, feeling crappy and so forth, well, it's merely labeled as my body. There's no I that is inherent. Well, there's no self that exists inherently and owns this body. And similarly, the disease that gives rise to, or the causes of the disease that give rise to whichever symptoms I experience, again, they don't inherently give rise to those. There's also karma at play. So none of those inherently give rise to this experience, but they do conventionally do so. There is a merely labeled I experiencing that. There's a merely labeled symptom. There's a merely labeled disease. But this disease, since it's not inherently causing suffering, I can turn it around and use it to practice, for instance, Tonglen. So every time I experience the symptom of my disease, to take a moment and visualize I'm taking, with these symptoms, I'm taking on the suffering of other sentient beings. And instead, whatever healthy part of my body is left, well, I send this out towards other sentient beings to bring happiness, bring peace of mind, and so forth. So the way you'll know actually Tonglen, how to practice Tonglen. So since none of these factors are inherently negative, none of them inherently give rise to suffering, there's the freedom in our mind to turn any unpleasant situation into the Dharma. And actually, that makes Dharma practice much more effective. If there's suffering, an easy situation, not like a kind of daily situation that we can easily cope with, kind of bringing the Dharma or practicing the Dharma in those circumstances doesn't have the same powerful effect than situations that will agitate us, they upset us, and so forth. So it's actually, we should see it as a great opportunity. And maybe what will help, of course, will be in October, as Wholeness will teach the 7-point mind training. And there again, it talks about using any adverse situation to transform into the path. So another opportunity then to receive teachings by, wow, a truly enlightened being, His Holiness, on how to utilize adverse conditions. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I'm not sure I was able to answer it. Which I wasn't able to, I'm not sure I answered your question, which takes me to the next part of today's class. This is something that's been on my mind the whole time, which are the outlines, Lama Tsongkhapa, or the headings of the outlines from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. Now, as you know, I tried with this handout, I tried to summarize, especially Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, take out some of the concepts that I find important, especially relating to the root text. But of course, there's no way I could really explain what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying. And this is really just a summary. And it's much better to read the text itself, especially because it doesn't just concern the root text. There's also a lot of auxiliary, like other explanations that go into slightly, well, still related topics, but it's extremely extensive. Anyway, Lama Tsongkhapa, with this commentary, he divided it in different sections, giving a heading to each section. And that is extremely beneficial, but only really, or most effective, let's put it that way. It's most effective if you spend a lot of time with this text and you memorize the outlines. Once you've memorized them, just the process of memorization helps you to get a better understanding. Oh, this comes first, this comes next, this comes next. And these headings can be so complicated. And so I would really need to spend well, ideally every day with this text. This is how we study a text like this. Every day you have classes on this, you debate it. Your whole life revolves around a text like that. So in that case, the outlines, that is the headings, are extremely beneficial and they give you a full sense of the text. But for the purpose of this class, meeting only once a week, I found so far they were a little bit confusing. But I thought, well, we've gotten so far. I might as well, as part of this handout, I prepared it today as a handout. I was done too late to send it off, so I'll send it off to you anyway. But these are not all the headings, not all the outlines. They're not the headings of all the outlines, but the ones that are that deal with the topics I described in the handout. In particular, that deal with the root verses, because not every outline in Lama Tsongkhapa's text has a root verse that is explained. I mean, there are a lot of other topics Lama Tsongkhapa goes into, which, like I said, I couldn't go into all of those. Now, I still haven't decided whether I should at least use some of the outlines, some of the headings, and integrate them into the text. I can always do that. I can always start to do it now. So let's see. I'll go through as a summary of what we've done so far. I want to go through some of the outlines to give you a better sense of why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, I'm a little bit worried that you lose the sense of the forest because you're focused on certain trees, right? We lose sight of everything because we're so focused on seeds and sprouts and what have you. All right, so let me just explain. I'm not explaining here, I'm not going through the outlines of the verse of homage. This is from after the verse of homage was done. I don't see that much of a need of it. Well, right now, no, I think it's fine. But most important is the first chapter, actually all the way up to verse number 5. I've prepared it up till then. So what happened, what does Lama Tsongkhapa in his commentary, what does he explain after he was done with the verse of homage, explaining the verse of homage from the fundamental wisdom? Well, he says explaining the meaning of each chapter. So really, those 3 headings here, or those 3 headings of 3 outlines, are a summary of the entire text. Number 1, demonstrating that dependent arising lacks inherent existence. So it's empty of essential existence. This is a term that's used in J. Garfield's text. So lacking essential existence, which is just the same as inherent existence. But it works quite nicely in the way the Tibetan is how these headings are formulated in Tibetan. So to say the essence or essential existence, it's funny to say the inherence. So if you use a noun for inherent existence, well, yeah, inherent existence works. But anyway, you'll see. So I've used essence here. Many of the outlines are exactly, or the headings are exactly the same as J. Garfield's. Some I slightly changed when I thought the Tibetan needed a little bit adjustment. Anyway, so first of all, what does Nagarjuna demonstrate? He demonstrates that dependent arising lacks inherent existence. Okay. Next, he explains the fact that whether one remains in cyclic existence or withdraws from it depends on whether one understands exactly that. Okay, so we want to get out of cyclic existence. We want to attain liberation. We need to understand the lack of inherent existence. So that's another part that is clarified in here in a later chapter. And then once one understands dependent origination and the lack of inherent existence, the erroneous views are abandoned. Okay, so this is really what the fundamental wisdom is all about. This is the summary of the 27 chapters, divided into 3 sections. Okay, then taking the first point, dependent arising is empty of inherent existence or in essential existence. So the main point of that in general, the explanation of that in general, and then the rebuttal of some refutations. So rebuttal in the sense of refuting some opposition from some other philosophers, which of course is also part of what we've done already, but this is there's a special section on that later on. Okay, so the main point, again, what are we doing right now? We're dealing with the lack of inherent existence of dependent arising. Now, that's the main point. And that is again divided into a brief presentation of the two types of selflessness and an extensive presentation of the two types of selflessness. So, selflessness of phenomena and selflessness of person. Or emptiness of phenomena, emptiness of person. So, what does Lama Tsongkhapa tells us? Well, that Nagarjuna is teaching us the lack of inherent existence of dependent arising by way, of course, teaching the two types of selflessness, because dependent arising is of the two, person and phenomena. It's a phenomenon. And so in order to understand the lack of inherent existence of dependent arising itself, which is usually used as the reasoning for emptiness, but we need to understand that even that reasoning, dependent arising, lacks inherent existence. Well, understanding that, we need to understand, of course, selflessness of phenomena. Okay. So, therefore, it goes on to say a brief presentation. So the main point of refuting dependent arisings and refuting inherent existence of dependent arising, the main point consists of the explanation of the two selflessnesses. First a brief presentation of the two selflessnesses and an extensive presentation. Then in terms of the brief presentation, that can be again divided into two. The first of which is chapter 1 and the second is chapter 2. But I only wrote chapter 1 because that's where we got to. So we're right now dealing with a brief presentation of the two selflessnesses in order to, of course, demonstrate that dependent arising lacks inherent existence. Okay, in that first chapter, what is exactly set forth? What happens in the first chapter? Well, the refutation of the essence or inherent existence of phenomena through the examination of the agency and action of cause and effect. Okay, so that's the outline that is given, or the heading of the outline given here. So what is refuted? The inherent existence. In Tibetan, the word is rangshin. Rangshin can mean nature, it can mean essence, and if it is expressed together with existence, it means inherent existence. But here it's used as just a noun, just rangshin. So therefore, I think essence is good. So inherent existence, essence of phenomena. So refuting the inherent existence of phenomena by way of examining agency and action, so that which produces, that which arises, and then the action of producing an action itself of cause and effect. All right. And then the next, so this is emptiness of phenomena. And then you have the refutation of the essence of the person, so the lack of inherent, the refutation of the inherent existence of the person through examining the person's action. So the action and the agent of going and coming, that very basic action of going and coming. So that's the second chapter. So it's number 1 and 2, they're just brief presentations of the two types of selflessnesses. Okay, so just having that as this background knowledge, so not losing sight of why we're doing this. Lack of inherent existence of dependent arising. And how do we get there? By understanding the two types of selflessness. And so these are presented in the fundamental wisdom in a brief way and an extensive way. The brief explanation, the first chapter, you have the selflessness of phenomena. In the second chapter, you have the selflessness of person. And that's just the brief presentation.
Geshe,
Seems, yes, please.
may I just ask for a clarification?
Yes.
When
of
you
course.
were just in 1A,
Mhm,
refutation of the essence of phenomena through the examination of the agency,
mhm.
can you just explain what that agency means in the context of looking at selflessness of phenomena? I forget.
Okay. Agency, okay, that I took this from Jay Garfield. So agency is the agent of something, that which does, right? So in the case of, let's say, a cause, what does a cause do? It produces. What does a condition do? It produces. So to analyze, to examine, we haven't really done that. Well, we have to a certain degree. So for instance, what does the effect do? It arises. It arises. So the agency, what do you analyze in terms of the agency when it comes to cause and effect? Well, what does a cause do? What does a result do? Right? What does a result do? What does a cause do? So what are the functions they perform? Okay. So when we say cause, what does that even mean? A cause is defined through its function. Does anyone know what the definition of a cause is? What is the definition of a cause? Anyone? Does anyone know? The definition of a cause is it's that which produces. The definition of a cause is Geshe in Tibetan. So remember, I had these two words that sound very similar, the transitive and the intransitive verb. Here, the transitive verb is used of generating, producing, giving rise to. So geba in Tibetan. Geba in Tibetan means, well, to give rise, to produce. And so the Tibetan definition of cause is that which gives rise, that which produces, that which generates. So generate, produce, giving rise, used as synonyms here. That shows us that a cause or condition, what are they defined by? They're defined by their actions. Okay, that's why we go on about a cause and then we start analyzing what does it do? It produces. But also what it does, it facilitates the arising. What is the agent of the arising? It's the effect. So the cause produces and the effect arises, right? So you have the age. So from the point of view of agency, that's what cause and effect do. Those are the main characteristics. But of course, they don't do so inherently. But in order to understand that they lack inherent actions, we need to first understand the actions. We need to first understand conventionally how it works to then refute its inherent existence. So agency, therefore, refers to that which performs the action of producing or arising. And then action is, let's look at the actual producing and the actual rising itself, right? Without relating it back to that which does the arising or that which does the producing. Just as in that summary I presented last week, like walking. What are the different steps? What is the walking within the walking? So to look at the action itself. Okay. Then we have chapter 1, which deals with exactly this topic here. And the first chapter basically consists of an explanation of the contents of the first chapter. Okay, that's what we're doing right now. Then whatever will be explained in the first chapter, at the very end, whatever has been explained will be confirmed by citations from definite sutras. Because it's like saying, well, Nagarjuna didn't just make it up. The Buddha supports, I mean, the explanation given by the Buddha support exactly what the Buddha said. So there will be some quotes from appropriate sutras or related sutras. And then the summary of the chapter and its name. The name is given at the end. Okay, now this is the whole of, this is the first chapter. So it's kind of helpful. This is what's to expect, etc. Then the explanation of the contents of the first chapter. Okay, so this is the first of those three. Refutation of the essence of the arising of results, and the refutation of the essence of conditions in that which gives rise to things. Okay, so this one we've dealt with, the refutation of the essence or the inherent existence of the arising of results. No, we haven't finished it yet, but we're still dealing with that. Okay, so that's part of what we're studying right now. We're studying the explanations of the contents of the first chapter. And as part of that, to be more specific, the refutation of the essence of the arising of results. Okay, and then that again is divided into these three: refutation of the four extremes with respect to arising, which we covered in verse 1, and then rebutting the claim that he here means Nagarjuna, is contradicting the sutras in rejecting arising from another, verses 2 and 3. Okay, so the refutation of the essence of the arising of effects. There's this outline that Amatsongkhapa presents here, or this heading that he presents. He says verses 1 to 3 actually is all about refuting the inherent existence of the arising of effects. Of course, that is also dealt with later, but from a different perspective. So really the first three chapters, the first three verses, that's what they actually deal with. First of all, the four extremes, of course, we've gone through them: arising from itself, from other, both, and neither. Okay, but also as part of refuting the essence of the arising of effects, part of that is also the sutric quote. Remember, someone saying, well, since the Buddha taught the four conditions and the six causes, therefore he taught that causes and conditions exist inherently. Therefore, there's inherent arising and so forth. And then number 3, then, of course, saying, no, that's not what these sutras mean. They do teach these causes and conditions. Yes, that is being taught, but not inherently. There's no inherent. Let me just go back to verse number 3. Number 3, just to remind you. Where's number 3? Okay, that's number 3. Oh, yes. So in the first, in number 2, as you remember, it goes on about like this other person who believes that the Buddha taught inherent existence because he taught the four causes, etc. And then in answer to this, that that's not true, that this is not what the text teaches. It does teach the four conditions, yes, and there's no other condition, there's no fifth condition, such as a creator God. All that is true, but it's all from the point of view of conventional existence. And that if phenomena were to exist inherently and they were to arise from a cause inherently, well, then you'd have the absurdity that first of all, that the sprout would exist already in its own causes and conditions, because the arising of the result, if the arising of the result existed inherently, the result would already be there. And since the arising of the result is of one nature with its causes and conditions, where would you find that result, that arising of the result? You would find it in the causes and conditions, right? That was that reasoning as part of number 3. And then the second reasoning was, well, secondly, as part of the arising from something inherently different, not only would there be inherent arising, but also cause and effect would be inherently different. And if cause and effect were inherently different, well, they would exist at the same time, because you can't have something that is inherently different from something else without that something else being there. So cause and effect, if they were inherently different, would have to exist at the same time in order to be different. Okay, so that was all mentioned. That was all mentioned in verse number 3. Oops, I lost it now. Oh, here we go. So this is what was part. So verse 1 was described, and verses 2 and 3 as part of this outline here. Okay. And then, oh yes, oh sorry, I forgot. So here rebutting, I forgot to mention this part here. So this one here can be divided again, rebutting this claim that he's contradicting the sutras. It's subdivided into two, presenting the argument that this contradicts sutra, and then rebutting the argument. Oh, I just copied this. Rebutting the argument that this contradicts sutra. I made a mistake here. I just copied it and I forgot to adjust it. Probably. Oh no, sorry, it's correct. Rebutting the argument that this so presenting the argument that this contradicts sutra and rebutting the argument. Oh yes, so that's presenting the argument, and that is rebutting or refuting that this argument, refuting this argument, which claims that what Nagarjuna says contradicts the sutras. Okay, all right. So this far, I hope at least to remind you that from verse 1 to 3, this is what we went through. Verse number 1, the four extreme ways of arising, they were refuted, and number 2 and 3, the argument by someone that it contradicts the sutra, and then the answer. Now, even more importantly, here in the next outlines, we take this. So here, oh yeah, I drew this line here because this, the refutation of the essence of conditions in that which gives rise to things, was taken from above. Okay, so it's like it's going back to a previous outline. So the refutation of the essence is, it's number 2, so it should be 2b. Oh yeah, here, 2b. Where's 2b? I'm getting terribly confused. So 2b, oh here, the refutation of the essence of conditions and that which gives rise to things. This is so difficult. Actually, in Tibetan, it doesn't mention them again. It always says first one, second one, third one, depending on. So you need to always go back. Where's the first one? What is, so it took me a while to put this together, but now I've got it. So no problem. I can always add on to it. In English, it was easier, but I also needed to find the Tibetan to check the translation. Anyway, so the refutation of the essence of conditions in that which gives rise to things. Okay, that was part of this outline here, the explanation of the contents of the first chapter. So this second outline here is now explained right here. Okay, so now we'll continue with verses 4 and 5. Well, 4 we've done, 5 I hope we can do today, maybe not. So the refutation of the essence of conditions in that which gives rise to things. All right. The common refutation of the inherent existence of conditions. So now this is important. This whole chapter is called examining conditions, which is synonymous with causes. Causes and conditions here, whether you say conditions or causes. And since in the Abhidharma literature, it talks about 4 conditions, well, therefore the term condition is used. Now, here it's about the lack of inherent existence of conditions. So causes and conditions, although we started off with the arising, but that which arises or that which facilitates the arising is the condition. So it makes perfect sense to analyze the conditions or the causes. So first of all, refuting that they lack inherent existence. And then the common refutation, so just in general, the refutation of the conception of the view of the wrong view of the inherent existence of conditions in terms of agency. All right, here we're back with agency. It was mentioned before, but now it's more specific. Refuting that conditions, that causes and conditions exist inherently in terms of agency. So what did we talk about in that context? Well, arising. And what is it that arises? The result. So we analyze that to some degree. And then next is the refutation of the conception of the essence of conditions in terms of action. So to put it in different words, refuting the inherent existence of conditions in terms of the action itself. So here we look at causes and conditions. Do they exist inherently or not? In terms of what? In terms of the actions that are performed. The action of arising, but also, of course, part of that is the action of producing. Right? It's implied many times, but it'll also be mentioned later on. So anyway, there are two actions that take place here, producing and arising. And those are the actions we're looking at. But from the point of view of that which performs the action. So what performs the action? The cause performs the action of producing, and the result performs the action of arising. All right. So in terms of those two, cause and effect, looking at them the way we've done so far, we continue to do. And then we look at the lack of inherent existence of conditions. We examine that, but we look more at the action itself. Okay. Now, when it comes to the first outline here, the refutation of the inherent existence of conditions in terms of agency, or that which performs the action. Well, first of all, refutation of the inherent existence of conditions by reason of, or on the ground that they facilitate the action of arising. That was verse number 4. Remember when it went on, when it made this kind of, it seemed contradictory statement. What was that? This kind of slightly contradictory. Oh, an action has no conditions. There's no action that is without conditions. That which lacks action is no condition, nor do conditions have actions, right? This kind of back and forth saying, well, inherently an action has no condition, but conventionally there's no action that is without conditions. And that which lacks action is no condition. So that which lacks inherent existence can have no action, can have no condition, but conventionally, you can't have an action of arising if there's no condition. But inherently, conditions have no inherent action. All right, so we've went through this kind of complicated statement or this complicated verse, but really what it deals with, what it tells us here is that a condition lacks inherent existence, a cause, a condition lacks inherent existence based on the fact that it facilitates the action of arising. So it can't exist inherently because it's dependent on the action of arising, and the action of arising is dependent on it. And because of these, of facilitating this action of arising, we label it condition, we label it cause. It's not an inherent phenomenon. So in this verse number 4, I think that became quite clear, clear in the sense of this arising of the result and the condition, how both have to exist conventionally, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And then what actually I wanted to do today, but I won't get the time to do, is verse number 5, the refutation of the concept, or the wrong concept, of the inherent existence of conditions by reason of, or on the ground of, the arising of their result, which is a really interesting idea, because this is something in the lower schools. They say the arising of a result happens only just before the result. So just before the result has arisen, a moment before that, the arising of the result happens in the lower schools, especially the Satantrika. So if you're more familiar with this school, if you studied, for instance, Pramanavartika, you're much more familiar with the idea of arising happening at the end. But what's so unique to the fundamental wisdom is that Nagarjuna stresses very much arising happens in every moment, because a cause is dependent on its result. The lower schools don't say a cause is dependent on the result. They say a result is dependent on the cause, but not the other way around. But in the Prasangika school, a cause is also dependent on the result, because a cause facilitates a rising of the result in each moment. If it didn't facilitate the rising of a result in each moment, why would it be a cause? So this is very unique to the Prasangika school. In particular, to this explanation is very unique to this fundamental wisdom, but we haven't gone into it yet, and I'm afraid time is up. In my mind, it's like once I prepared them, I was like, 15 minutes the handout, the 15 minutes the outlines, and then we'll continue. I've raced through them, I must admit, but I'll send the material to you. If not today, then tomorrow. I mean, tomorrow's Holness will teach, so I have to still prepare a few things for the translation tomorrow. But anyway, I'm pretty sure I can send it to you tomorrow. And hopefully looking at it again, it helps you to put things into context a little bit from everything I said. So I hope it wasn't too confusing. I am thinking I may slowly integrate some of these, at least mention some of them. Not all the headings of the outlines are helpful, but maybe some of them are. And I would like to hear your input, because right now I don't know whether what I did today was extremely confusing, because I don't really see you guys. Let me just go through it. Yes?
I was just
Yes.
going to say it is so helpful, because I
Oh.
didn't even realize that the purpose of the first chapter was that we're trying to show that dependent arising itself is empty of inherent existence. I was so caught up in, the minutiae of each verse. Like you said, I could see the forest. Like, so this is so helpful to have an idea of what the project is and how each of the verses contributes to it.
Yes, good. I'm glad I'm glad to hear that. That was the whole purpose of it. And I must say, I should have stressed this more. I kind of left the outlines to the side and thought it was too confusing. But actually now in retrospect, I'm thinking I should have stressed it more. But anyway, what's done is done. So I probably go back and kind of add that to the handout. But for now, I'm thinking I've given you that summary. We can do a short meditation on this.
Geshe, may I ask something, please?
Yes, please.
About the sentence, the result performs the action of the rising. And does it, I want to make sure that I understood it. It's
So
only.
can you say that again? Performs. Use the word
result
performs.
The action of the rising.
Oh, yes.
Only, so my question is, I want to make sure I understood it right. Only according to the Prasangika, because they see as part of the result the process of arising. The arising is in every minute. It's all the time. It's a process. So part of it. Otherwise, it sounds like the result is a state. What does it has to perform? Only the cause of the next phenomena. But in the process we're talking about, if we see that it has a performance, some sort of performance, it's only because part of the result also is the process of arising. How come it performs?
Do you mean every moment of a cause? Are you asking every moment?
Of the result.
Like, let's say you have 5 moments of a cause. How come every moment facilitates the arising of the result, but there's still no arise during the second moment, that moment, and so forth?
But
Is
the
that your
main
question?
problem, this is a bit easier to understand. The main problem for me is to, when we're talking about the result, not the cause. When we're talking about the result, it sounds like the lower schools that is a state, it doesn't perform anything. It is a result of the process. The Prasangika says, in each moment, we see the arising. Also,
First of all, in the lower schools, they would still say that which performs the arising is the result. But actually, Leora, sorry, I just realized this is something we're going to do well, now next time, if you read ahead a little bit, actually, maybe it's helpful, and then you can ask this question, of course, again. But you see, this is the Sautrantika view, and this is the Prasangika view. So yeah, I don't think there's enough time now to answer this, but we go into this next time. So please don't forget this question, right, Leora? Don't forget the question. Maybe read in advance what I wrote here. And if it's not answered, you definitely, yeah, please maybe write it down as well, if you can, if you don't mind, or send me a voice message. Yeah, you don't need to write it, but you can send me a voice message, right? Because I'm not sure I understood correctly. And there's only 10 minutes left. So
Thank you.
yeah, let's do a short meditation, if that's okay. Yes, let's do a short meditation. Let me just look for the material. Just a sec. Yes, I hope I can manage a short meditation. I'll try. Okay. So we'll start again, as we always do, with focusing on the breath, mindfulness of the breath. Now, as we've had today, one of the main purposes for the fundamental wisdom is not just to realize emptiness in general, but to realize the emptiness of dependent arising. So dependent arising is set forth not just as a reasoning for the lack of inherent existence, but also as the basis for its own emptiness. Which Nagarjuna explains by way of explaining the two types of selflessness. With the emptiness of dependent arising, of course, attaining to the emptiness of phenomena. Now, the emptiness of phenomena is briefly described in the first chapter. The first chapter describes the emptiness, the lack of inherent existence of a cause and its effect. By examining their functions, their actions of producing and arising. So that the first chapter combines both emptiness of phenomena and emptiness of dependent arising on causes and conditions. And so with verse 1, we learned that dependent arising on causes and conditions, or dependent arising in reliance on causes and conditions, is free from four extremes. Things don't arise from themselves. Something inherently different, and so forth. And then verse number 2 presents an argument by one of the lower schools that the Buddha taught inherent existence because he taught the four conditions and six causes. But as Nagarjuna explains in verse number 3, well, although the Buddha taught different causes, different conditions, he taught their conventional existence. Because as explained in verse number 3, there is no inherent cause since there's no inherent arising. With inherent arising referring to something objectively and intrinsically coming into existence depends on causes and conditions, and a cause and its result being inherently different. None of these two make any sense. Because if arising existed objectively and from its own side, it would be found in its causes and conditions. It would exist at the time of its cause, because it would exist in its cause. As inseparably linked to its cause. And if a cause and its result were inherently different, cause and effect would have to exist at the same time. Otherwise, a cause wouldn't have anything to be different from if it didn't exist at the same time. And then the text continues with verse number 4. More specifically, looking at the action that is facilitated by a cause or a condition, which is the action of arising. So Nagarjuna tells us that on one hand, an inherently existing arising does not depend on conditions. An inherently existing arising of a result does not rely on conditions that produce that result. But a conventionally existing arising does. And it also teaches us that a condition is only a condition if it does facilitate a conventionally existing arising. However, conditions do not facilitate an inherently existing arising, because that cannot be facilitated. sorry. Take a moment, whatever conclusion you've come to allow for it to sink in, and single-pointedly focus on that. Remembering that this establishes the lack of inherent existence of dependent arising, especially dependence on causes and conditions. And then let's dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated today. First of all, may it become one of the many causes we need to accumulate in order to become fully enlightened, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of each and every sentient being. And may, of course, also become a cause for our great lamas, the great masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to have an extremely long and healthy life, so that they can continue to guide and inspire us. And lastly, may I also have those who are unwell or sick, like Tali Lubin, Geshe, everyone else who's suffering from physical ailments or mental ailments. May they soon recover and they soon get better, but may it also cause the minds of those beings in the world who are moving away from democracy. May it have an effect on their minds to find back their, or help them to understand the disadvantages of autocratic systems, so that instead they're moved towards returning to a fair democratic rule of government. And then let's recite the prayers together with this in mind. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Denzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Great, thank you very much. Sorry, there was a short disruption. You were suddenly gone. I was suddenly gone, but maybe you didn't notice. Okay, great. So see you again next week. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you so much,
Bye-bye.
Geshe-ma.
Good one.
Good night.
Good dear.